They say a wedding dress should be the most beautiful thing a woman ever wears, but Evelyn Merrow's was soaked in rain, torn at the hem, and splattered with her own blood. She wasn't walking down an aisle. She was running for her life. Through the Montana storm, with thunder drowning out her sobs, she fled the man who promised to love her but taught her only fear. Behind her, rage. Ahead, darkness. And somewhere in between, a lone cowboy who would change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Evelyn's journey travels. The storm had been building all afternoon, dark clouds rolling in from the west like a slow-moving army. By the time the first drops of rain hit the windows of the riverside chapel, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple, gray, and something sickly green at the edges. Inside, the chapel smelled of lilies and beeswax candles, and Evelyn Merrow stood in the back room, staring at herself in a tarnished mirror. The wedding dress had cost more than most families in Silver Creek earned in a month. White silk, hand-stitched lace, seed pearls sewn into the bodice like tiny tears frozen in fabric. It should have made her feel beautiful. Instead, it felt like a shroud. "You look perfect, darling." Her Aunt Martha fussed with the veil, her fingers trembling slightly. She was nervous, Evelyn realized. They were all nervous. "Marcus will be so pleased." Marcus. Even his name made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She touched her lip gently, feeling the slight swelling where he'd struck her 2 nights ago. She'd covered it with powder, but she could still feel it, a reminder of what waited for her at the end of that aisle. "I need a moment alone," Evelyn said quietly. Her aunt's face creased with concern. "But dear, the ceremony starts in 10 minutes. Please," Evelyn's voice cracked. "Just 1 moment." Martha hesitated, then nodded, squeezing Evelyn's shoulder before slipping out. The door clicked shut, and Evelyn was alone with her reflection and the sound of rain beginning to hammer against the roof. She'd known Marcus Thornhill for less than a year. He'd arrived in Silver Creek last spring, a successful businessman from Denver with money, charm, and an easy smile that made the town's matrons whisper approvingly. When he'd shown interest in Evelyn, plain Evelyn Merrow, the daughter of a deceased rancher who'd left her nothing but debts and a piece of land everyone said was worthless, people called it a miracle. "You're so lucky," they'd told her. "A man like that, choosing you." They didn't see what happened behind closed doors. They didn't see how his smile disappeared when they were alone, replaced by something cold and calculating. They didn't see the way his hand would close around her wrist like a vice when she said something he didn't like, the way his voice would drop to that dangerous whisper. "You're embarrassing me, Evelyn. Do you want to embarrass me?" They didn't see 3 days ago, when she'd questioned him about the papers he wanted her to sign, documents that would transfer her father's land to him the moment they married. He'd backhanded her so hard she'd tasted blood. "Don't you ever question me again," he'd hissed, his face inches from hers. "You're mine now. That land is mine. Everything you have is mine. And after tomorrow, you'll learn what happens to wives who don't obey." The memory made her hands shake. She pressed her palms flat against the vanity, trying to steady herself, trying to think. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and the rain intensified, drumming against the chapel like 1,000 urgent fingers. "Run," something inside her whispered. "Run now." But run where? She had no money. Marcus had made sure of that, insisting on handling all her affairs for her own good. She had no family except Aunt Martha, who was too frail and frightened to stand against Marcus. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The door opened. Evelyn's heart lurched, but it was only Reverend Michaels. His round face creased with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Merrow, we're ready for you. The guests are seated and Mr. Thornhill is waiting at the altar." Evelyn nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. The Reverend withdrew, and she heard the wedding march begin to play on the chapel's old piano, the notes thin and tinny in the storm-heavy air. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading for weeks. In a few minutes, she would walk down that aisle, speak vows she didn't mean, and become Mrs. Marcus Thornhill. The law would give him everything, her land, her freedom, her very body, and there would be no escape after that. Run. The word was louder now, more insistent. She looked at the window, small, high up, but big enough. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't do this. She couldn't walk down that aisle and chain herself to a man who hurt her, who would only hurt her more once the ring was on her finger and the law called her his property. The music swelled. Someone knocked on the door. "Evelyn? It's time, dear." Her hands moved before her conscious mind caught up. She grabbed the chair, dragged it to the window, climbed up. The window was stiff from disuse, and she had to push hard, her arms shaking with effort. Finally, it gave way, swinging open to admit a blast of cold, rain-soaked wind. "Evelyn?" The doorknob rattled. "Evelyn, what are you—" She didn't wait to hear the rest. She gathered the heavy skirts of the wedding dress, wedged herself through the narrow opening, and dropped into the mud below. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Rain immediately soaked through the expensive silk, plastering the fabric to her skin, weighing her down. She could hear shouting from inside the chapel. They'd discovered her absence. She had seconds, maybe less. Evelyn struggled to her feet, her fine white shoes sinking into the mud. The wedding dress was already ruined, lace tearing on thorns as she pushed away from the building. Behind her, she heard the chapel door bang open. "Evelyn!" Marcus's voice cut through the storm, sharp with fury. "Evelyn, get back here, now!" Terror gave her legs strength of her. She ran, holding up the sodden skirts as best she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The town was too dangerous. Marcus had friends there, people who would drag her back to him. She needed to get out, get away, disappear into the vast Montana wilderness. If the wilderness killed her, at least she'd die free. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes. The chapel behind her, the muddy road ahead, the endless rolling plains stretching to the mountains. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it seemed to shake the earth. "There she is!" Someone was chasing her. She risked a glance back and saw two figures emerge from the chapel, Marcus and his hired man Briggs, a brutal enforcer who did Marcus's dirty work. "Don't let her reach the road." But Evelyn was already stumbling onto the main thoroughfare, her shoes slipping on wet stones. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. East, away from town, toward what? Nothing. No one. Just empty country and the slim hope that she could somehow disappear. The wedding dress was like wearing an anchor. The wet fabric wrapped around her legs, tripping her. She fell hard, her palms scraping on gravel, her knee striking a rock. Pain shot up her leg, but she forced herself up, limping now, the white dress streaked with mud and blood from her torn palms. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Marcus's voice was closer now. He was gaining on her. Of course he was. He was a man, unencumbered by layers of wet silk, stronger, faster. "When I catch you, Evelyn, you're going to regret this. You hear me? You're going to beg me to forgive you." The rain was blinding now, a solid wall of water that made it almost impossible to see. Evelyn's lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she kept running. What else could she do? She didn't see the rut in the road until her foot caught in it. This time, when she fell, she couldn't get up. Something in her ankle had twisted badly, sending waves of agony up her leg. She tried to rise, but the pain was too much. Behind her, she heard Marcus's triumphant shout, "Got you now!" This was it then. She'd tried. She'd fought. But she'd failed. Evelyn curled onto her side in the mud, the rain hammering down on her, and waited for his hands to close around her. She thought briefly of her father, dead these 3 years, and wondered if he was ashamed of her for being so foolish as to think she could escape. The sound of hoofbeats made her eyes snap open. Through the rain, a horse and rider appeared like a ghost, a tall man on a dark horse, approaching at a steady canter. For a moment, Evelyn thought it might be another of Marcus's men, sent to cut off her escape. But something about the way the man sat his horse, the set of his shoulders, told her this was someone different. The rider drew closer, and she could make out details. A weathered hat pulled low, a long coat that had seen better days, strong hands gentle on the reins. He slowed when he saw her, lying in the mud like something broken and discarded. Marcus was perhaps 30 yards behind, Briggs at his heels, both of them closing fast. But the stranger had reached her first. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots splashing in the puddles, and knelt beside her. Up close she could see his face, rugged, tanned from long days in the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard living and harder choices. But his eyes, gray as the storm clouds above, held something she hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine concern. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, rough around the edges, but not unkind. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Evelyn tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed to shake her head, though it was a lie. Everything hurt. Her ankle, her hands, her face where Marcus had struck her days ago, her heart that felt like it might shatter in her chest. The stranger looked at her more carefully, taking in the torn wedding dress, the bruises she'd tried to hide, the terror in her eyes. His jaw tightened. "Who did this to you?" Before she could answer, Marcus's voice rang out. "Get away from her. That's my fiancée." The stranger's gaze shifted to Marcus and Briggs, now stopping a few feet away, both breathing hard from the chase. He stood slowly, positioning himself between Evelyn and the two men, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "That so?" His tone was conversational, almost pleasant, but Evelyn saw the steel beneath it, the coiled readiness of a man who knew how to handle trouble. "Funny way to treat a fiancée, chasing her through a storm." Marcus drew himself up, trying to regain his composure. He was a handsome man when he wanted to be, with dark hair and fine clothes that even the rain couldn't completely ruin. He put on his public face, the charming smile that fooled so many. "I appreciate your concern, friend, but this is a private matter. My fiancée has had a moment of wedding nerves. Understandable, really, but I need to take her back now. The ceremony is waiting." "That right?" The stranger looked down at Evelyn. "Ma'am, this man your fiancé?" Evelyn's mouth was dry. She looked at Marcus, saw the warning in his eyes, the promise of what would happen if she said the wrong thing. But then she looked at the stranger, at those steady gray eyes that seemed to see more than most people did, and something in her broke, or maybe it finally found the courage to speak. "I don't want to marry him," she whispered. Then louder, her voice shaking but clear. "I don't want to marry him. He hurts me. I was running away." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Marcus's face darkened. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's hysterical, confused. She sounds pretty clear to me." The stranger's voice had gone cold. "Lady says she doesn't want to go with you. I reckon that's the end of it." "The end?" Marcus took a step forward, his charm evaporating like mist. "Do you have any idea who I am? I have contracts, agreements. Her father's land is promised to me. She's mine, and if you don't step aside right now, I'll have you arrested for what?" The stranger's hand didn't move from his gun, but his stance shifted slightly, ready. "Stopping a man from dragging a woman through a storm against her will? I'll take my chances with the law on that one." Briggs moved to Marcus's side, his own hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. He was a big man, scarred and mean, the kind who enjoyed violence. "You're making a mistake, cowboy." "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life." The stranger's eyes never left Marcus. "This ain't one of them." The tension stretched out, brittle as glass. Evelyn held her breath, certain that at any moment violence would erupt, that she'd be responsible for this kind stranger's blood in the mud. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus stepped back. His face was a mask of barely controlled rage, but he was smart enough to recognize a fight he might not win. Not here, not now, not with a witness who wasn't intimidated by his money or his threats. "This isn't over," Marcus said softly, the words somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. He looked past the stranger to Evelyn, and his smile was a terrible thing. "Evelyn, sweetheart, you're upset. I understand, but you're going to come back to me. Maybe not today, but soon. Because where else are you going to go? Who else is going to take care of you? You're nothing without me. You have nothing without me." He turned to the stranger. "And you, whoever you are, you just made an enemy. I promise you'll regret interfering. I'll try to lose sleep over it." The stranger's tone was dry. Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then jerked his head at Briggs. "Come on, we're going back, but this isn't finished." He looked at Evelyn one more time. "I'll be seeing you real soon, darling. Count on it." They turned and walked back toward town, Marcus's spine stiff with fury, Briggs looking back over his shoulder with a promise of violence in his eyes. The stranger waited until they were out of sight before holstering his gun and turning back to Evelyn. She was still lying in the mud, shivering so hard her whole body shook, the white dress now more gray than white, clinging to her like a second skin. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. She tried. She truly did. But when she put weight on her injured ankle, agony lanced through her leg, and she collapsed with a small cry of pain. Without a word, the stranger shrugged out of his long coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat, smelling of leather and horses and wood smoke, and Evelyn clutched it gratefully, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. "Looks like you twisted that ankle pretty good." He knelt beside her again, his hand surprisingly gentle as he examined her foot through the ruined shoe. "You're soaked to the bone, hypothermia's setting in, and you can't walk. I got a cabin about 3 miles from here. It ain't much, but it's warm and dry. I can take you there, let you rest up, tend to that ankle." Evelyn wanted to say yes. She wanted to say yes so badly, but fear had been her companion for so long that she couldn't quite let it go. I don't even know your name." "Rhett Callahan." He touched the brim of his hat. "I run a small ranch north of here. Been on a cattle drive the last 3 weeks. Just heading home when I saw you." "I'm Evelyn Marrow." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Miss Marrow." He said her name like it was something precious, not the worthless thing Marcus had made her believe. "I ain't gonna hurt you. I give you my word on that. But you can't stay out here in this storm, and that man struck me as the type who doesn't give up easy. You need somewhere safe to rest and figure out your next move." She looked into his eyes and saw no deception there, no hidden agenda, just a man offering help to someone who desperately needed it. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Rhett nodded. He stood, then carefully lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Evelyn tensed instinctively. Marcus had taught her to fear a man's hands, but Rhett's hold was secure without being constraining, his movements careful as he carried her to his horse. The horse was a big bay gelding with kind eyes and a steady temperament. Rhett lifted Evelyn onto the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her secure. She was acutely aware of his body against her back, solid and warm, so different from Marcus's cruel grip. "Try to relax," he said quietly, close to her ear. "I got you. You're safe now." Evelyn wanted to believe him. As they began to move, the horse's gait smooth despite the muddy road, she leaned back against Rhett's chest and let herself hope, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, she really had escaped. The rain continued to fall as they rode away from Silver Creek, away from the chapel where her wedding should have been, away from Marcus and his fury. Rhett guided the horse with practiced ease, his body shielding Evelyn from the worst of the wind and rain. She must have dozed, exhausted and overwhelmed, because the next thing she knew, the horse was stopping and Rhett was saying softly, "We're here." Evelyn blinked, disoriented. The storm had lessened to a steady drizzle, and before them stood a small cabin, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. It wasn't much to look at, but to Evelyn, who had thought she might die in the mud of a Montana road, it looked like salvation. Rhett dismounted and reached up for her, lifting her down with the same careful gentleness. Her ankle screamed in protest when he set her on her feet, and she would have fallen if he hadn't kept his arm around her. "Easy now. Let's get you inside." He half carried her to the door, kicked it open, and brought her into the cabin's shadowy interior. It was a single room, sparsely furnished, a bed in one corner, a rough table and chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves holding supplies. But it was dry, and when Rhett settled her into a chair near the hearth and began building a fire, warmth started to seep back into the space. Evelyn watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the hearth, orange light dancing across the cabin walls. Rhett hung a kettle over the fire, then turned to her. "You need to get out of that wet dress." He said it matter-of-factly, no leer or suggestion in his voice. "I got some clothes that'll be too big on you, but at least they're dry. There's a blanket there. You can change behind it while I tend to my horse. I'll knock before I come back in." Before she could respond, he was gone, closing the door behind him and leaving her alone with the growing warmth of the fire. Evelyn stared at the flames, hardly able to believe what had happened. Hours ago, she'd been in that chapel, trapped and terrified. Now she was here, in a stranger's cabin, wearing a ruined wedding dress and trying to understand how her life had come to this moment. Her hands were still shaking as she struggled with the buttons of the dress, her fingers clumsy with cold and shock. The silk resisted her efforts, the wet fabric stubborn. She wanted to cry from frustration, from exhaustion, from the sheer overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. A soft knock on the door made her freeze. "Miss Marrow?" Rhett's voice came through the wood. "I found some women's clothes in my stores. Belonged to my sister when she visited last year. I'm leaving them by the door. You take your time." She heard footsteps moving away. After a moment, she limped to the door, opened it a crack, and found a bundle of clothes neatly folded on the threshold. She pulled them inside quickly, not wanting to be seen even in the fading light. The clothes were simple: a cotton shirt, work trousers, a woolen sweater. They would indeed be too large on her, but right now that seemed a blessing. She peeled off the soaked wedding dress, letting it fall in a sodden heap, along with the layers of petticoats and corset that Marcus had insisted she wear. Standing in her wet undergarments, she felt lighter somehow, as if she'd shed more than just clothing. She dried herself as best she could with a rough towel she found hanging near the fireplace, then dressed in Rhett's sister's clothes. The trousers felt strange. She'd never worn men's clothing before, but they were warm and dry, and that was what mattered. Another knock. "You decent?" "Yes." Rhett came back inside, carrying his saddlebags and a rifle, which he propped carefully by the door. His eyes swept over her briefly, assessing but not judging. "Better. Now let's look at that ankle." He pulled another chair close to hers and gestured for her to extend her leg. When she did, he unlaced her ruined shoe with careful fingers and eased it off. Evelyn hissed in pain as he examined the swollen ankle, his touch gentle but thorough. "It's a bad sprain, but I don't think it's broken," he said finally. "I'll wrap it tight, and you need to keep off it for a few days at least. You got lucky. Could have been a lot worse." Lucky. Evelyn almost laughed at the word. She'd run from her own wedding, been chased through a storm, injured herself, and was now dependent on a stranger's kindness. But as she looked at Rhett's bent head as he wrapped her ankle with strips of clean cloth, his movements sure and practiced, she supposed that in some ways he was right. It could have been worse. She could have married Marcus. "There." Rhett tied off the bandage and sat back. "That should help. Water's hot. I'll make some coffee. You should drink something warm." As he moved around the cabin, preparing coffee in a battered pot, Evelyn finally found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" Rhett paused in his work, then continued measuring coffee grounds. "Because you needed help." "But you don't know me. You don't know anything about me or my situation. I could be lying about everything. Maybe Marcus was telling the truth." "Was he?" Rhett's gray eyes met hers steadily. Evelyn looked away into the fire. No, he wasn't." She touched her lip unconsciously, the swelling still tender. "He hits me. He's been controlling, cruel. The land my father left me, it's all he really wants. I was trying to tell myself I could manage it, that after we were married things would get better, but you knew they wouldn't," Rhett finished quietly. "I've seen men like him before. They don't get better. They get worse once they think they own you." The word sent a chill through her. "That's what he said. That I'm his. That everything I have is his." "A woman ain't property." Rhett poured coffee into 2 tin cups, brought one to her. "I don't care what the law says or what some fancy contract claims. You got a right to say no. You got a right to walk away." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. "But I have nowhere to go. No money, no family who would stand against him. And Marcus, he meant what he said. He'll come looking for me. He doesn't give up on things he wants." "Then he'll have to go through me to get to you." The simple certainty in Rhett's voice made Evelyn look up sharply. "You can't mean that. You don't even know me." "Don't have to know you to know that what he was doing was wrong." Rhett settled into his own chair, cradling his coffee. "Look, Miss Marrow." "Evelyn," she interrupted softly. "Please. Just Evelyn." He nodded. "Evelyn, I ain't going to pretend I'm some kind of hero. I'm just a man trying to make a living raising cattle in hard country. But I know right from wrong, and I know when someone needs help. You needed help. Simple as that. It wasn't simple, though. Nothing about this was simple. But as Evelyn sat in the warm cabin wearing dry clothes and drinking hot coffee while the storm raged outside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The fragile, terrifying possibility of hope. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Rhett was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if reading tea leaves. Finally, he said, "Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we figure out what comes next. If you want to go somewhere else, I'll take you wherever you need to go. If you want to stay here for a spell until you're healed up and got a plan, you're welcome to do that too. No expectations, no obligations. I have nothing to pay you with." Didn't ask for payment. "But Evelyn," he said her name firmly but kindly. "Right now you're hurt, exhausted, and running on fear and adrenaline. You don't need to make any decisions tonight except to close your eyes and rest. Everything else can wait till morning." Tears suddenly blurred her vision, not from sadness, but from the simple, overwhelming kindness of his words. When was the last time someone had told her to rest, to not worry, to just be? She couldn't remember. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you, but thank you." Rhett stood, took her empty cup, and set it aside. Then he pulled a blanket from the bed and handed it to her. "You take the bed. I'll make do with the floor by the fire." "I can't take your bed." "You can, and you will. You're injured, and you've been through hell today. I've slept in worse places than a warm cabin floor, trust me." He was already spreading another blanket near the hearth, making himself a rough pallet. The discussion, clearly, was over. Evelyn limped to the bed, her ankle protesting every step. The mattress was thin but clean, and when she lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her body seemed to collapse in on itself, all the tension and terror of the day finally catching up with her. Rhett banked the fire and settled onto his pallet, turning his back to give her privacy. "Try to sleep, Evelyn. You're safe here. I promise." In the flickering firelight, with rain still pattering softly against the roof and the warmth seeping into her bones, Evelyn closed her eyes. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how Marcus would react or what consequences she'd face for running. She didn't know if Rhett's promise of safety was one he could actually keep. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't alone. She wasn't trapped, and she wasn't afraid. As sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of a lone cowboy who'd stopped in the rain for a stranger wearing a torn wedding dress, who'd offered help without asking for anything in return, and who'd given her something she'd thought was lost forever. A choice. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over the Montana plains, the storm having passed in the night, but leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping. Evelyn woke slowly, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. Rough log walls instead of wallpaper, the smell of wood smoke and leather instead of perfume, and silence except for the soft crackling of a fire that someone had already rebuilt. Memory rushed back in a flood that made her breath catch. The wedding, the escape, Marcus, and Rhett, the cowboy who'd found her in the rain. She sat up carefully, her body stiff and aching in ways she hadn't expected. Her ankle throbbed dully, and when she looked down, she saw it was still wrapped in the clean bandages Rhett had applied the night before. The clothes she wore, his sister's clothes, felt strange but comforting in their simplicity. Rhett was at the table, his back to her, doing something she couldn't quite see. He must have heard her movement because he spoke without turning around. "There's water warming by the fire if you want to wash up. Coffee's ready when you are." His voice was rough with mourning, but kind. Evelyn swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her ankle gingerly. The pain was sharp when she put weight on it, but bearable. She hobbled to the basin he'd indicated, grateful for the warm water and the sliver of soap that sat beside it. As she washed her face and hands, trying to scrub away the last remnants of yesterday's terror, she became aware of sounds from outside. The soft nickering of horses, the creak of a door, footsteps on wood. When she finished and turned back to the cabin's interior, Rhett was pouring coffee into 2 cups. "Sleep all right?" he asked, handing her one. "Better than I expected." It was true. Despite everything, exhaustion had pulled her under into a dreamless sleep. "Thank you for all of this." Rhett just nodded as if rescuing runaway brides was something he did every other Tuesday. He gestured to the table where he'd laid out a simple breakfast: bread, some cheese, dried apples. It ain't fancy, but it'll keep you going. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Evelyn trying not to wolf down the food despite the fact that she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday morning, maybe? Before the wedding that never was. The bread was dense and hearty, the cheese sharp and good. Simple food, but it tasted like freedom. Finally, Rhett set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. We need to talk about what comes next. That man, Marcus, he's going to come looking for you. Man like that doesn't let go of what he thinks belongs to him without a fight. The food turned to ash in Evelyn's mouth. She'd known this was coming, had felt it hanging over her like a sword, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real again. I know, I don't know what to do, where to go. You got any kin? Anyone who'd take you in? Evelyn shook her head. My parents are both dead. I have an aunt in Silver Creek, but she's elderly and frightened of Marcus. She wouldn't stand against him, and even if she would, he'd find me there immediately. Friends? Another shake of her head. Marcus? He made sure I didn't keep friends. Said they were a bad influence, that they filled my head with foolish ideas. Anyone who questioned him, I wasn't allowed to see anymore. Rhett's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. What about that land he was so interested in, the property your father left you? It's 160 acres about 10 miles west of Silver Creek. My father homesteaded it, broke his back trying to make it work, but the land's rocky and the water's unreliable. Everyone said it was worthless. Evelyn's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. But about 6 months ago, there were rumors. A mining company came through, doing surveys. People started saying there might be silver deposits in those hills. That's when Marcus started courting me. So he doesn't want you. He wants the land. The bluntness of it stung, even though Evelyn knew it was true. Yes, he had papers drawn up, contracts that would transfer the deed to him once we married. I tried to read them, but the legal language was complicated, and when I asked questions, she touched her lip again, that habitual gesture. He hit you. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. He said a wife doesn't question her husband's business decisions, that I should be grateful he was willing to marry me at all, plain as I am, with nothing to offer but a piece of worthless dirt. Rhett's expression darkened. That man's a fool, then, and a cruel one. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Those papers you mentioned, you signed them yet? No. He wanted me to sign them after the ceremony as part of the wedding celebration, in front of witnesses so it would be legal and binding. So legally, the land's still yours. Technically, yes, but Marcus has been managing my affairs. He convinced me to give him power of attorney months ago, said it was to help me with the property taxes and such. I was stupid. You weren't stupid, Rhett interrupted firmly. You were trusting. There's a difference. He took advantage of that trust, which makes him the villain in this story, not you. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at his words. How long had it been since someone had spoken to her with such straightforward respect? Even so, I don't know what legal standing I have now, and Marcus has money, lawyers. I have nothing. You have yourself. That counts for more than you think. Rhett stood, moved to the window, looked out at the gray morning. Here's what I'm thinking. You stay here for now, just a few days, till that ankle's healed enough for you to move around better. Gives you time to think, to plan. In the meantime, I'll ride into Silver Creek, see what folks are saying, maybe talk to the land office about your deed. Alarm shot through Evelyn. No, you can't. If Marcus sees you, if he knows you're helping me, he already knows I helped you. Might as well get some use out of being his enemy. Rhett's tone was dry. Besides, I can be discreet when I need to be. Marcus Thornhill might have money, but I've been in these parts longer than he has. I know people he doesn't. It's too dangerous. So, is you staying in the dark about your own legal situation? He turned from the window to face her. Evelyn, you got 3 choices as I see it. 1, you run. Head to another territory, try to start over with nothing. 2, you hide, but hiding's just slow running. Eventually you get found. Or 3, you stand your ground. You figure out what you legally own, what rights you got, and you fight for them. I can't fight him. He's too powerful. Maybe, but Maybe he's not as powerful as he wants you to think. Bullies often aren't. Rhett crossed his arms. I ain't saying it'll be easy. I ain't saying there's no risk. But seems to me you already took the hardest step when you ran out that window yesterday. Everything else is just details. Evelyn wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But fear was a habit she'd learned too well. Why would you risk yourself for me? You keep saying you don't know me, but you keep helping. Why? Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the cabin walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. I had a sister once, younger than me by 3 years. Sweetest girl you'd ever meet, always laughing, always seeing the good in people. When she was 19, she married a man who seemed decent enough, charming, successful, all the things a mother hopes for her daughter. He paused, his jaw working. Took about 6 months before we started noticing things. She stopped visiting, stopped writing. When we did see her, she always had excuses. Clumsy, she'd say. Walked into a door, fell downstairs. We believed her because we wanted to. Because the alternative was too awful to consider. Evelyn's heart clenched. She knew where this story was going. By the time we understood what was happening, she was too deep in it, too scared, too beaten down. We tried to help, but she wouldn't leave him, said she'd made vows, that marriage was forever, that she could fix him if she just tried harder. Rhett's hands clenched into fists. One night, he went too far. Neighbors heard her screaming, came running. By the time they broke down the door, she was gone. He'd strangled her, said she'd provoked him, that it was an accident. Oh, God, Evelyn whispered. Rhett, I'm so sorry. He served 5 years, got out on good behavior. The words were bitter as poison. 5 years for taking the light out of the world. For taking my sister, my parents' daughter, someone who deserved so much better than what she got. He looked at Evelyn then, really looked at her, and she saw grief in his eyes, but also something harder, more determined. So when I see a woman running from a man who hurts her, I don't ask questions. I don't wonder if it's my business. I help. Because maybe if someone had helped Sarah sooner, been more insistent, made her see she had choices, maybe she'd still be here. Evelyn's throat was tight. I'm not your sister. No, but you could be someone's sister, someone's daughter. You're a person who deserves to be safe, to be free. That's enough for me. They stood in silence, the weight of his confession hanging between them like something sacred. Evelyn understood now this wasn't just about her. This was about a man trying to make peace with a past he couldn't change by changing someone's present. It was both more and less than she'd expected. All right, she said finally. If you're willing to go into town, I won't stop you. But please, be careful. Marcus is dangerous, and he has people loyal to him. I'll be careful. Rhett's expression lightened slightly. Now, you should rest that ankle. I got chores to do, horses to tend, fence to mend. You need anything, there's a bell by the door. Ring it, and I'll come running. He grabbed his hat and coat, then paused at the door. One more thing. That wedding dress you were wearing, I hung it outside to dry last night. Figured you might want to burn it, sell it, or do whatever you need to do with it. Your choice. Then he was gone, closing the door gently behind him, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and the slowly dying fire. She moved to the window, watching as Rhett walked to the small barn, his stride easy and confident. He disappeared inside, and moments later she heard the sound of a horse whinnying, the murmur of his voice as he spoke to the animals. There was something comforting about the ordinary sounds of ranch life, so different from the stifling atmosphere of Marcus's house, where every sound had made her flinch. The wedding dress hung from a line stretched between two posts, looking forlorn and strange in the morning light. The once pristine white silk was stained with mud, torn at the hem, a ghost of what it was supposed to represent. Evelyn stared at it for a long time, feeling nothing but a distant relief. She'd destroyed a fortune in that dress last night, money Marcus had spent to make her look like the perfect bride. Good. Let it rot in the Montana wind. She spent the morning moving around the cabin slowly, learning its spaces, finding where Rhett kept things. It was a bachelor's home, sparse and practical, but clean and well organized. There were books on a shelf, mostly about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a few novels, their spines cracked from repeated reading. She pulled one down, a copy of Ivanhoe, and settled into the chair by the fire to read. But her mind kept wandering. What was happening in Silver Creek right now? Was Marcus tearing the town apart looking for her? Was Aunt Martha worried sick? And what would happen when Marcus eventually found her? Because he would find her, she had no illusions about that. He'd been clear yesterday that he considered this a temporary setback, not a defeat. Around noon, Rhett came back in, stamping mud from his boots. "How's the ankle?" "Better, I think. Still sore, but not as swollen." "Good. Keep off it as much as you can today." He moved to the stove, began preparing a simple lunch: beans and bacon, more bread. As he worked, he spoke casually, as if discussing the weather. "I'm planning to ride into Silver Creek this afternoon. Should be back before dark. There's food enough here if you get hungry, and the rifle by the door is loaded if you need it. You know how to shoot?" "My father taught me when I was young. I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at mostly." "Good enough. I don't expect trouble, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared." He paused in his cooking. "If anyone comes to the door while I'm gone, don't open it, don't answer, just wait for me to get back." "You think Marcus will find this place?" "Not today. Maybe not ever, depending on how smart he is. But better safe than sorry." They ate together, and Evelyn found herself studying Rhett when he wasn't looking. He was probably in his early 30s, with the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. Not handsome in the conventional sense, his features were too rough, his face too lined, but there was something solid about him, something dependable. He moved with the economy of someone used to hard work, and he spoke with the directness of someone who didn't waste words. He was, she realized, the opposite of Marcus in almost every way. Where Marcus was charming and smooth, Rhett was plain-spoken. Where Marcus made grand gestures and empty promises, Rhett offered simple help and kept his word. Where Marcus had used his hands to hurt, Rhett had used his to heal. After lunch, Rhett saddled his horse and prepared to leave. Evelyn watched from the doorway, her weight resting mostly on her good foot. "What will you tell people if they ask about me?" she said. "In town, I mean." Rhett considered this as he checked his saddle straps. "Depends who's asking. Most folks, I'll say nothing at all, none of their business. If it's someone I trust, might mention I'm making inquiries on behalf of a friend. The land office, I'll just say I'm interested in property records for the western parcels. Nothing that leads back to you directly. And if you run into Marcus, then I'll be polite and unhelpful in that order." He swung into the saddle with practiced ease. "Don't worry, Evelyn. I've dealt with men like Marcus before. I know how to handle myself." She wanted to tell him to be careful again, but she'd already said it once, and repeating it would just reveal how frightened she was. So instead, she said, "Thank you. For everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then urged his horse forward. Evelyn watched until he disappeared down the trail that led away from the cabin, swallowed by the rolling hills and scattered pines. Then she was alone. The afternoon stretched out long and quiet. Evelyn tried to read, but her mind wouldn't focus on the words. She paced as much as her ankle would allow, then forced herself to sit still. The cabin felt both safe and confining, a haven and a cage. She wasn't used to having nothing to do, no demands on her time. Marcus had always kept her busy with endless tasks and errands, all designed to keep her under his control and too tired to think clearly. Now, with time to think, her mind turned over and over the same problems. Even if Rhett could find out information about her land deed, what good would it do? She couldn't go back to Silver Creek to claim it. She had no money to hire a lawyer, no way to fight Marcus in court. And even if by some miracle she could legally hold on to the property, Marcus would find other ways to make her life impossible. He was vindictive, and he didn't forget slights. Maybe running was the only real answer. Head to California, or maybe north to Canada. Start over with a new name, a new life. But the thought filled her with despair. Why should she have to give up everything because of one man's cruelty? Why should he get to keep what was rightfully hers? The sun was lowering toward the horizon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. She grabbed the rifle from beside the door, checked that it was loaded as Rhett had said, and positioned herself away from the window where she could see the door but wouldn't be immediately visible to anyone entering. The horse stopped outside. Footsteps on the porch. A knock. "Evelyn? It's me, Rhett." Relief flooded through her so intensely her knees went weak. She set the rifle aside and opened the door. Rhett stood there, his expression grim, and she knew immediately that the news wasn't good. "What happened?" she asked as he came inside. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his dark hair. "Town's in an uproar. Marcus has half of Silver Creek out looking for you. He's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown, that you're sick and confused, that he's desperately worried about your well-being." "Of course he is," Evelyn said bitterly. "Playing the concerned fiancé. He's put up a reward. $50 to anyone who brings information about your whereabouts." Rhett's jaw was tight. $50 is a lot of money around here. People who normally wouldn't look twice are suddenly very interested in finding you. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Then it's only a matter of time before someone figures out I'm here." "Maybe, maybe not. I was careful, and this place is remote enough. But it does mean we need to move faster than I'd hoped." He pulled a chair out, sat heavily. "I went to the land office, like I said. Your deed is recorded and legitimate. The property's in your name, free and clear. Your father paid it off before he died." "That's good news, isn't it?" "It would be, except Marcus has been busy. He filed a claim with the territorial court, saying you're mentally unfit to manage your own affairs and requesting guardianship. If the court grants it, he gets control of everything you own, including the land." Evelyn felt the walls closing in. "Can he do that? Just declare me insane?" "He's got doctors willing to sign statements. Got your Aunt Martha saying you've been acting strangely, forgetting things, having episodes." Rhett's expression was disgusted. "It's all lies, of course, but if there's no one to contradict him, the court might believe it. Especially since you ran away from your own wedding, he's using that as evidence of mental instability." "This is insane," Evelyn laughed, a bitter sound. "The real insanity is that the law would give a violent man control over the woman he's been abusing." "I know, it ain't right, but that's how the system works. A woman's word against a man's, especially a man with money and influence." He shook his head. "You need a lawyer, someone willing to fight this." "I told you, I don't have money for a lawyer." "There's a man in Helena, name's Edmund Garrett. He's got a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers won't touch, especially cases involving women's rights. I sent him a telegram this afternoon, explained the situation in general terms. He wired back that he'd be interested in hearing more." Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Why would he help me without payment?" "Because some people still believe in justice more than money." Rhett pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I wrote down everything you told me about the situation, about Marcus, the abuse, the land, the contracts. If you're willing, I can send this to Garrett. Let him decide if there's a case worth fighting." Evelyn took the paper, unfolded it. Rhett's handwriting was surprisingly neat, the words laying out her nightmare in stark, clear prose. Seeing it written down made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This was her life. This was what she was fighting against. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I fight him in court, Marcus will destroy me. He'll drag my name through the mud, make up lies, turn everyone against me." Probably. What Rhett's honesty was brutal but somehow comforting. "He'll do everything he can to discredit you, to make you seem like the villain in this story. It won't be easy or pleasant. But if I don't fight, then he wins. He gets your land, your money, everything you have, and he'll spend the rest of his life knowing he broke you." Rhett leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I won't lie to you, Evelyn. This is going to be hard. But hiding for the rest of your life, always looking over your shoulder, always afraid, that's hard too. At least if you fight, you got a chance. At least you go down swinging." Evelyn thought of her father, who'd broken his back trying to make that land work, who'd built something out of nothing through sheer stubborn will. She thought of Marcus's hands around her wrists, his voice in her ear telling her she was nothing, worthless, lucky he'd even look at her. She thought of yesterday, running through the rain in a torn wedding dress, certain she was going to die. And she thought of Rhett's sister, Sarah, who'd died because she couldn't find a way out, who'd believed the vows she made were more important than her own life. "Send the letter," she said. "Tell this Mr. Garrett I want to fight." Rhett nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. "I'll take it to the telegraph office first thing tomorrow. In the meantime, you need to write down everything you remember, every time Marcus hit you, every threat he made, every witness who might have seen something. The more detail, the better. All right. Evelyn felt something shifting inside her, fear giving way to something harder, sharper, anger. She'd been scared for so long, letting Marcus dictate her life, her choices, her worth. Maybe it was time to stop being scared and start being angry instead. They spent the evening working by lamplight, Evelyn writing out her testimony while Rhett prepared dinner and tended to his evening chores. The words came hard at first, each memory a small violence she had to relive. But as she wrote, she found a strange kind of relief in documenting it all. These weren't just scattered bad memories anymore. They were evidence. They were proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't overreacting like Marcus always claimed. When she finally set down the pen, her hand cramping from the effort, she had 5 pages of close written testimony. Rhett read it over carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is good," he said finally. "Detailed, specific. This is exactly what Garrett needs. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's a start." He folded the pages carefully, added them to his earlier letter. "I'll get this sent tomorrow, then we wait to hear back." That night, as Evelyn lay in Rhett's bed once again and listened to him settle onto his pallet by the fire, she felt different than she had the night before. Still scared, still uncertain, but also determined. She'd spent so long being a victim that she'd forgotten she could be anything else. But maybe, with help, with someone willing to stand beside her instead of over her, she could be something more. A fighter, a survivor, a woman who refused to be broken. In the darkness, she heard Rhett's quiet voice. "Evelyn, you still awake?" "Yes." "Whatever happens, whatever comes next, you did the right thing, running yesterday. It took courage. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like terror. Sometimes courage is just terror that keeps moving forward anyway." A pause. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we start fighting back." And for the first time since she'd agreed to marry Marcus Thornhill, Evelyn felt something like hope. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm that felt both rushed and suspended in time. Rhett rode out each morning to send telegrams, gather supplies, and keep his ear to the ground about Marcus's movements. Each evening he returned with news, none of it particularly encouraging. Marcus had expanded his search, sending men to neighboring towns, questioning anyone who might have seen a woman matching Evelyn's description. The reward had increased to $75, a sum that would feed a family for months. But there was also good news. Edmund Garrett, the lawyer from Helena, had responded with interest and was making arrangements to travel to Montana within the week. He believed, based on Evelyn's testimony, that there was sufficient evidence to fight Marcus's guardianship claim and potentially bring charges of assault and coercion. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was more hope than Evelyn had dared to feel. Her ankle was healing well under Rhett's careful attention. By the 3rd day, she could walk without limping too badly, though he still insisted she not overdo it. The forced rest gave her time to think, to plan, and to watch the man who'd saved her go about his daily life with quiet competence. Rhett Callahan was unlike any man she'd known. He rose before dawn and worked until after dark, tending his small herd of cattle, mending fences, chopping wood, maintaining the cabin and barn with the kind of steady persistence that spoke of a life built on self-reliance. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He never made her feel like a burden, never suggested that helping her was an inconvenience, though she knew it must be costing him in both time and potential danger. On the morning of the 4th day, Evelyn woke to find Rhett already gone and a note left on the table in his careful handwriting. "Writing to check the north pasture, should be back by noon, stay inside, R." She made coffee, tidied the cabin, though it hardly needed it, and tried to settle her restless energy with reading. But the words swam before her eyes, her mind too full of worry to focus. What if Garrett couldn't help? What if Marcus found her before the lawyer arrived? What if the court believed Marcus's lies about her mental state? Around mid-morning, she heard something that made her freeze. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast. Her first thought was that Rhett had returned early, but the sound was wrong. Too many riders, moving with purpose rather than the easy pace of a lone cowboy. She moved quickly to the window, staying back from the glass where she wouldn't be seen, and peered out. 3 men on horseback were approaching the cabin. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider's expensive coat and the cold set of his shoulders. Marcus. And with him were Briggs and another man she didn't recognize, someone with a marshal's badge glinting on his chest. Terror flooded through her system, sharp and chemical. They'd found her. After all Rhett's precautions, all the careful planning, Marcus had found her. She grabbed the rifle from beside the door, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Her mind raced through options. She could hide, but where? The cabin was small, with few places to conceal herself. She could run, but her ankle wasn't strong enough yet for a sustained flight, and they'd run her down within minutes. She could shoot, but there were 3 of them, and she wasn't confident enough in her marksmanship to take on multiple armed men. The horses stopped in front of the cabin. She heard Marcus's voice, smooth and confident. "This is the place. Callahan's ranch. I have it on good authority he's been harboring my fiancée. Now, Mr. Thornhill," the marshal's voice was uncertain, uncomfortable. "We don't know for certain. Then let's find out. Marshal, I'm asking you to perform your duty. There's a woman inside who's been reported missing, possibly mentally unstable and in danger. We need to ensure her safety." Evelyn's grip tightened on the rifle. So that was his angle, claiming concern for her welfare, using the law as his weapon. Clever. If she refused to come out, she'd look irrational, confirming his claims about her mental state. If she did come out, she'd be placing herself in his custody with legal backing. Footsteps on the porch. A knock, firm and official. "This is Marshal Hendricks. If there's anyone inside, please open the door. I just want to talk." Evelyn pressed her back against the wall beside the door, rifle held across her chest. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought they might hear it from outside. She said nothing. Another knock, harder. "Ma'am, I know you're in there. Mr. Thornhill here says you're his fiancée, that you've been missing for several days. He's worried about you. We all are. Please, just open the door so we can make sure you're all right." Still, she remained silent, her mind working frantically. Where was Rhett? How long until he returned? Could she hold them off until then? Marcus's voice now, pitched to carry through the door, dripping with false concern. "Evelyn, sweetheart, it's me. I'm not angry, I promise. I know you were frightened, confused. The wedding, all those people, it must have overwhelmed you, but we can work through this together. Just come out, come home. Let me take care of you like I promised." The words made her skin crawl. She could picture him out there putting on his performance for the marshal, the worried fiancé desperate to rescue his troubled bride-to-be. No mention of the bruises he'd given her, the threats he'd made, the control he'd exerted over every aspect of her life. "I'm going to count to 3, Marshal Hendricks said, authority creeping into his tone. "If you don't open this door, I'll have to break it down. I have legal authority here, ma'am. I'm trying to be respectful, but I will do my duty." 1. Evelyn's mind raced. If they broke down the door and found her armed, they could claim she was dangerous, violent. More evidence for Marcus's claims about her mental instability. 2. She looked around desperately, seeking any alternative, any way out of this trap. 3. The door shuddered as someone, probably Briggs, hit it with his shoulder. The wood groaned but held. Another impact, harder. The door wouldn't last much longer. And then, cutting through the sound of splintering wood, came another voice. Rhett's voice, hard as iron and cold as winter. "That's far enough." Evelyn's breath caught. Through the window, she saw him sitting his horse about 20 yards away, perfectly still, one hand resting on his thigh near his holstered revolver. He must have circled around when he heard the commotion, approaching from an angle that gave him the tactical advantage. Marcus spun to face him, his expression flickering between anger and calculation. "Callahan, I should have known. You've been hiding her, haven't you? Sheltering a mentally unstable woman, keeping her from her family and those who care about her." "Funny definition of care you got there." Rhett's voice was conversational, but Evelyn could hear the steel beneath it. "Last I saw, men who care about women don't chase them through storms or hire marshals to drag them back against their will." Marshal Hendricks stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he'd been pulled into. "Now, Mr. Callahan, I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job. Mr. Thornhill has filed a missing person report and has concerns about Miss Marrow's well-being. I need to verify that she's safe." "She's safe." Rhett didn't move, didn't take his eyes off Marcus. She's also a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. If she doesn't want to see you, that's her choice, not yours to override. The law doesn't see it quite that way, Marcus said smoothly, especially when there are questions about mental competency. I have doctor's statements, Marshal. Show him. Hendricks reluctantly pulled papers from his coat. Mr. Thornhill has affidavits from 2 physicians stating that Miss Marrow has been exhibiting signs of mental instability, confusion, paranoia, violent outbursts. He's petitioning for temporary guardianship to ensure she receives proper care. Those are lies. The words burst from Evelyn before she could stop herself. She moved to the window where they could see her, the rifle still in her hands but pointed at the floor. Every word of that is a lie, and Marcus knows it. Marcus's face lit up with what might have looked like relief to someone who didn't know him. To Evelyn, it looked like triumph. Evelyn, thank God you're all right. Sweetheart, we've been so worried. Stop. Her voice was shaking but clear. Stop pretending you care about me. Stop lying to these men. I'm not confused, I'm not unstable, and I'm not going anywhere with you. You see, Marshal? Marcus turned to Hendricks, his expression sorrowful. This is exactly what the doctors warned about. Paranoid delusions, unfounded accusations. She needs help. The only person who needs help is you, Evelyn said, her anger finally overriding her fear. Help understanding that women aren't property, that abuse isn't love, and that you can't control someone just because you want to. Abuse? Marcus's voice rose in what sounded like genuine shock. Evelyn, I've never laid a hand on you. How can you say such things? You hit me 3 days before the wedding, split my lip. You've grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises more times than I can count. You've threatened me, controlled every aspect of my life, isolated me from anyone who might help. She was shaking now, not with fear, but with rage. And you're doing it because you want my land. Because you found out about the silver deposits and decided the easiest way to steal it was to marry me and make me sign it over. Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, his face twisting with fury before he caught himself. These are serious accusations, Evelyn, hurtful and untrue. I think they demonstrate exactly the kind of confused thinking. I have evidence. Evelyn's voice cut through his. Written testimony, dates, times, details of every incident, names of people who were present, documentation of your attempts to pressure me into signing over my property rights. I've already sent it to a lawyer who specializes in these cases. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something like uncertainty cross his face. He'd expected her to be cowering, broken, easy to manipulate. He hadn't expected her to fight back. That's slander, he said finally, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Actionable slander. You can't just make up stories. They're not stories. Rhett spoke up, his voice carrying authority despite his position on the periphery. I witnessed your behavior on the night she fled, saw how she flinched from you, saw the fear in her eyes, saw the healing bruises on her face. I'll testify to that in any court you want. Marshal Hendricks was looking increasingly uncomfortable. This is getting complicated. Mr. Thornhill, maybe we should... No. Marcus's control was fraying now, anger bleeding through. No, we're not leaving without her. She's my fiancée. She made a commitment, and I'm not going to let some cowboy and his lies... Choose your next words carefully. Rhett's hand moved fractionally closer to his gun, not threatening exactly, but a clear message. Because right now, you're trespassing on my property, attempting to force entry into my home, and harassing a guest who's under my protection. The marshal's presence doesn't give you the right to do any of that. Briggs had been quiet this whole time, but now he stepped forward, his hand on his own weapon. You threatening Mr. Thornhill, Callahan? Stating facts. There's a difference. Rhett's eyes flicked to Briggs, assessed him, dismissed him. But if you want to make it a threat, I'm happy to oblige. Gentlemen, please. Marshal Hendricks held up his hands, clearly way out of his depth. Mr. Thornhill, I came here because you said you were concerned about Miss Marrow's safety. She appears to be safe, of sound mind, and making her own choices. I'm not equipped to adjudicate claims of abuse or property disputes. Those are matters for the courts. Then take her into protective custody, Marcus demanded. If she's making claims against me, she should be somewhere neutral while it's investigated. I'm not going anywhere with any of you, Evelyn said firmly. She set the rifle aside, moved to the door, and opened it fully so they could see her clearly. She stood straight, met Marcus's eyes without flinching. I left you because you hurt me, because you scared me, because I realized that marrying you would be the biggest mistake of my life. I'm not coming back, not now, not ever. And if you try to force me, if you keep sending men after me, I will fight you with every legal means I have. Marcus stared at her, and she saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He was smart enough to know when he was losing control of a situation. The marshal was wavering, clearly no longer convinced of the mentally unstable narrative. Rhett was a wild card, armed and apparently willing to back up his words with action. And Evelyn herself was coherent, articulate, not at all the confused victim he'd painted her as. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice low and venomous. You think you can humiliate me? Leave me at the altar, spread lies about me, steal what's rightfully mine? You'll regret this, Evelyn. Both of you will. Is that a threat, Mr. Thornhill? Rhett's voice was deceptively mild. Because the marshal here is a witness to everything being said. Marcus's jaw clenched. It's a promise. You made a commitment to me, Evelyn. Broke a contract. There will be consequences. Legal consequences. I look forward to seeing you in court then. Evelyn was surprised by how steady her voice was. Where we can present all the evidence. Where doctors can examine me and confirm I'm perfectly sane. Where your claims about guardianship and mental instability will be exposed for the manipulation they are. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marcus jerked his head toward Briggs. We're leaving. For now. But this isn't finished. He swung into his saddle with barely controlled violence, his horse dancing sideways at the tension in his rider. Briggs mounted more slowly, his eyes never leaving Rhett, a promise of future violence in his gaze. Marshal Hendricks lingered, looking apologetic. Miss Marrow, if you want to file a formal complaint, she will, Rhett said before Evelyn could answer, through proper legal channels, with a lawyer present. The marshal nodded, clearly relieved to be done with this mess. He touched his hat to Evelyn. Ma'am, Mr. Callahan. Then he turned his horse and followed Marcus and Briggs back down the trail. They watched until the three riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Rhett dismount and walk toward the cabin, his posture still alert, still ready for trouble. He stopped at the base of the porch steps, looked up at Evelyn. You all right? She realized she was trembling, the aftermath of adrenaline making her legs weak. I don't know. I think so. I stood up to him. I actually stood up to him. You did more than that. You faced him down. Made him blink first. Rhett climbed the steps, put a steadying hand on her elbow as her knees threatened to buckle. Come on, let's get you inside. You need to sit down. He guided her to a chair, pressed a cup of water into her hands. She drank mechanically, her mind still processing what had just happened. She'd confronted Marcus. She'd called him out in front of witnesses. She'd refused to be intimidated. And she was still alive, still free, still herself. How did you know to come back? She asked. I thought you were checking the north pasture. I was. But I got a bad feeling, decided to circle back and check on things. Saw the horses from the ridge, recognized Thornhill's fancy gelding. Rhett poured himself coffee, his movements deliberate. Good thing I did. You were handling yourself pretty well, but things could have gotten ugly if they'd broken down that door. I was so scared. Evelyn's hands were still shaking slightly. When I saw him, when I heard his voice, all that fear came rushing back. I thought I was trapped again. But you didn't let the fear stop you. That's what matters. Rhett sat across from her, his expression serious. But we need to talk about what happens next. Thornhill's not going to let this go. You humiliated him in front of a lawman. Men like him, their pride is everything. He'll come back, and next time he'll be smarter about it. I know. Evelyn straightened her spine, pushing past the lingering fear. Which is why we need to move faster. Is there any word from Mr. Garrett? Got a telegram this morning. He's arriving in Silver Creek tomorrow afternoon. Wants to meet with you as soon as possible to go over your case. In Silver Creek? Alarm flared. But that's where Marcus... I know. It's risky. But Garrett says he needs to be there to file the proper paperwork, to meet with the land office and the territorial court, and he needs you there to give formal testimony. Rhett's expression was apologetic. I know it's asking a lot, but if you want to fight this legally, you have to do it in the open. Hiding out here won't solve anything long term. Evelyn knew he was right. She'd been safe here, protected, but it was a temporary solution. If she wanted to truly reclaim her life, she had to face Marcus on legal ground, with the law on her side instead of his. All right, she said, and was pleased to hear her voice come out firm. I'll do it. I'll meet with Mr. Garrett tomorrow. It's going to be dangerous. Thornhill will have people watching. He'll know the moment you show up in town. Then we'll need to be smart about it. Evelyn's mind was already working through possibilities. Is there a way to get into Silver Creek without being seen? A back road, maybe? A few, but getting in isn't the problem. It's what happens once you're there. You'll be exposed, vulnerable. Rhett ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. I don't like it. I don't like it either. But you said it yourself. I can spend my life hiding, or I can fight. She met his eyes. I choose to fight. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that the frightened woman he'd found in the rain was becoming someone different, someone stronger. All right then. We'll ride out before dawn, take the old mining road that comes into Silver Creek from the east. Less traveled, less chance of running into Thornhill's men. I'll get you to Garrett's office, and I'll stay with you the whole time. He lays a hand on you. He has to go through me first. You've already done so much. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. His tone brooked no argument. We're in this together now, whether Thornhill likes it or not. Besides, a hint of dark humor crept into his voice. I meant what I said to him. If he comes for you, he faces me first. I don't make idle threats. That night, as Evelyn lay in the darkness trying to sleep, her mind wouldn't rest. Tomorrow she would go back to Silver Creek, the place she'd fled from in terror just days ago. She would face not just Marcus but the entire town, people who'd known her all her life, who Marcus had spent days turning against her with his lies about her mental state. But she wouldn't be alone. Rhett would be there. And Edmund Garrett, a lawyer who believed her story. And somewhere, buried in territorial law and legal precedent, there had to be protection for women like her. There had to be justice. She heard Rhett shift on his pallet by the fire, probably as unable to sleep as she was. Rhett? She said softly into the darkness. Yeah? Why do you think he's so determined? Marcus, I mean. He could find another woman with land. Someone easier to control. Why keep coming after me? Rhett was quiet for a moment. Because you said no. Because you ran. Men like Marcus Thornhill, they're used to getting what they want. When someone denies them, especially someone they see as beneath them, it becomes about power, about proving they can't be defied. He paused. And because that land is worth a fortune if the silver claims are true. He's not just fighting for his pride, he's fighting for his future wealth. So it's never really been about me at all. No. Which means his attacks aren't really about you either. They're about his greed and his need for control. You just happen to be in his way. She heard him shift again. But here's the thing about men like that. They're used to people backing down, used to winning through intimidation and money and sheer stubbornness. When someone finally stands their ground, really stands it, they don't know what to do. Their whole strategy falls apart. You think I can really beat him? I think you already started beating him today. You stood on that porch and told him no in front of witnesses. You didn't break, didn't crumble. You looked him in the eye and claimed your own voice. Rhett's voice was firm in the darkness. That's the first step. Tomorrow's the second, and we'll take it together. Evelyn closed her eyes, holding on to his words like a talisman against the fear that threatened to swamp her. She'd spent so long being told she was weak, worthless, incapable of standing on her own. But maybe that had been the lie all along. Maybe strength wasn't something you were born with. Maybe it was something you built, brick by brick, choice by choice, moment by moment. Tomorrow, she would find out. They left in the pre-dawn darkness, the world still caught between night and morning, everything rendered in shades of blue and gray. Evelyn rode behind Rhett on his bay gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, her heart hammering against her ribs with each mile that brought them closer to Silver Creek. She dressed in the plainest clothes Rhett could find, a worn coat pulled up around her face, a hat borrowed from his sister's trunk, hiding her distinctive auburn hair. The goal was to slip into town unnoticed, ghosts passing through the early morning streets. The old mining road was rough and overgrown in places, forcing them to pick their way carefully as dawn began to break over the eastern hills. Rhett guided the horse with the practiced ease of someone who knew this country intimately, taking routes that kept them away from the main roads where Marcus might have posted watchers. They spoke little, both of them tense with anticipation and the awareness of what waited ahead. As they crested the final ridge before Silver Creek, Evelyn caught her first glimpse of the town in days. It looked exactly as it had when she'd fled. The same weathered buildings clustered along the main street, the same church steeple rising above the other structures, the same mountains forming a protective ring around the valley. But everything felt different now. She'd left this place as a victim, running blindly into the storm. She was returning as something else. She just wasn't entirely sure what yet. "Garrett's office is on the north end of town," Rhett said quietly, his voice low enough not to carry. "We'll come in from the back streets, avoid the main thoroughfare. Less chance of being spotted." Evelyn nodded against his back, not trusting her voice. Her mouth was dry, her palms sweating despite the morning chill. Part of her wanted to tell Rhett to turn around, to take her back to the safety of his cabin where Marcus couldn't reach her. But she'd made her choice. She was done running. They entered Silver Creek from an alley that ran behind the general store, the horses' hooves quiet on the hard-packed earth. The town was just beginning to wake up, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers moving about their morning routines. Rhett kept them to the shadows, moving with deliberate care, his body alert for any sign of trouble. Edmund Garrett's office was in a modest building that had once been a boarding house, its sign simple and unpretentious. Edmund Garrett, attorney at law. Rhett dismounted first, then helped Evelyn down, his hands steady on her waist. She felt the weight of his revolver against his hip as she slid past him, a reminder that he'd come prepared for violence if it found them. The office door was unlocked. Inside, a man sat behind a desk piled with papers and law books, his graying hair slightly disheveled, spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up as they entered, and Evelyn was struck by the intelligence in his eyes and the kindness that softened his weathered features. "Miss Marrow, I presume?" He stood, extending a hand. "Edmund Garrett. Please sit down, both of you." His voice was cultured but not pretentious, carrying the weight of education tempered by years of practical experience. Evelyn shook his hand, noting the firm grip, and settled into one of the worn leather chairs facing his desk. Rhett remained standing near the door, positioned where he could see both the street outside and anyone who might approach. Garrett sat back down, pulled a file folder toward him, and opened it to reveal the pages Evelyn had written, along with Rhett's supporting testimony and what appeared to be additional documents. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly. I've also done some investigating of my own over the past 2 days. What I've found is both encouraging and concerning." "Concerning how?" Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Marcus Thornhill has been very busy building his case against you. He's not just claiming you're mentally unstable, he's painting a picture of a woman who's been deteriorating for months. He has statements from merchants claiming you've been forgetful, from your aunt saying you've had episodes of confusion, even from your former housekeeper saying you've been talking to yourself." Garrett removed his spectacles, cleaned them with a handkerchief. "It's a carefully constructed narrative designed to strip you of your legal rights and give him control of your assets. It's all lies," Evelyn said, but her heart was sinking. "I never talked to myself. I was never confused. He orchestrated all of this." "I believe you. The problem is proving it." Garrett replaced his spectacles. "However, there's good news. First, you're here, coherent, clearly competent, which contradicts his entire narrative. Second, I spoke with Dr. Morrison yesterday. He's the territorial physician, independent, respected. He's agreed to examine you and provide a medical assessment. If he certifies you're of sound mind, it severely undermines Thornhill's guardianship petition." "And the abuse?" Rhett spoke from his position by the door. "The physical assault, the threats, the coercion?" More difficult to prove, unfortunately. It's your word against his, and Thornhill has positioned himself well in the community. However, Garrett pulled out another document, I found something interesting at the land office. Thornhill filed a mineral claim on your property 2 weeks ago, listing himself as the prospective owner. That's premature and legally questionable. He can't claim mineral rights to land he doesn't own. It suggests premeditation, a plan to take control of your property regardless of your consent. Evelyn felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. So he was stealing my land even before the wedding. It appears so, which helps establish motive for why he might want you declared incompetent. A sane woman might fight such a claim. An incompetent one under his guardianship couldn't. Garrett leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Marrow, I'm going to be direct with you. This is going to be a difficult fight. Thornhill has resources, influence, and the advantage of being a man in a system that's designed to favor men. You have the truth and the law on your side, but that's not always enough. What are our chances? Rhett asked the question Evelyn was afraid to voice. If we can get Dr. Morrison's certification, if we can demonstrate Thornhill's financial motive, if we can find even 1 or 2 witnesses willing to contradict his claims. Maybe 50-50. But it depends on the judge, the jury, if it goes that far, and how aggressively Thornhill fights back. Garrett's expression softened. I won't lie to you, there's a real possibility you could lose. Thornhill could get guardianship, could take your land, could force you back under his control. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Evelyn felt the familiar fear trying to claw its way back up her throat, trying to convince her that fighting was useless, that she should just give up now before things got worse. But then she thought of yesterday, standing on Rhett's porch and looking Marcus in the eye. Thought of the way his certainty had wavered when she'd refused to break. Thought of her father, who'd spent his life fighting this unforgiving land to carve out something worth having. I want to fight, she said clearly. Whatever the risks, whatever it costs, I want to fight. Garrett studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what looked like satisfaction. Good. Then here's what we do. First, you meet with Dr. Morrison this morning. He'll conduct an examination, ask you questions, assess your mental state. Be honest with him. He's a good man, and he'll see through any deception. Second, we file a formal response to Thornhill's guardianship petition, including your testimony about the abuse and coercion. Third, we request an emergency hearing to challenge his mineral rights claim. The more we can put him on the defensive, the less energy he has to attack you. When does all this happen? Rhett asked. Dr. Morrison can see Miss Marrow in an hour. I can file the legal documents this afternoon. The hearing... Garrett consulted a calendar on his desk. The judge is in town until Thursday. If we move fast, we might get on his docket for tomorrow or the day after. That's fast, Evelyn said. Too fast, maybe. She'd barely had time to catch her breath, and already they were rushing toward a confrontation that would determine her entire future. It has to be. Thornhill filed his petition 3 days ago. If we don't respond quickly, he could get a default judgment. Garrett's voice was kind but firm. I know this is overwhelming, but the law works on its own timeline, and we need to meet it. A knock on the door made everyone freeze. Rhett's hand moved to his gun, his body coiled and ready. Garrett held up a calming hand, moved to the door, and opened it a crack. Dr. Morrison, he said, relief evident in his voice. You're early. Thought I'd save the young lady a trip. An elderly man with a shock of white hair and a weathered medical bag entered, his sharp eyes immediately finding Evelyn. You must be Miss Marrow. I've been hearing quite a story about you these past few days. Evelyn stood, suddenly nervous. This man's opinion could determine everything. Doctor, thank you for coming. Let's see what's what, shall we? Dr. Morrison set his bag on Garrett's desk, pulled out a stethoscope and various instruments. Mr. Garrett, I'll need privacy for the examination. Mr. Callahan, I assume, given your protective stance, you can wait outside. Rhett looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded. She trusted Dr. Morrison's reputation, and she needed his honest assessment. Rhett touched his hat to her and stepped outside with Garrett, leaving her alone with the physician. Dr. Morrison gestured for her to sit, then pulled a chair close. Now then, let's start with the basics. How are you feeling physically? Any pain, discomfort? My ankle is healing well. Some residual soreness, but much better. Let me see. He examined her ankle with gentle, practiced hands, probing carefully. Nice work on the wrapping. Callahan do this? Yes, sir. He's got good instincts. This should heal clean. He moved on, checking her pulse, listening to her heart and lungs, looking into her eyes with a small light. His examination was thorough but kind, his touch professional and respectful. Finally, he sat back. Physically, you're in good health. A bit underweight, some signs of prolonged stress, but nothing alarming. He folded his hands. Now, let's talk about the other claims. Marcus Thornhill says you've been experiencing mental confusion, paranoid delusions, violent outbursts. Your aunt has given statements supporting this. What do you say to that? Evelyn took a breath, chose her words carefully. I say that Marcus Thornhill has been systematically abusing me for months, and when I finally escaped, he decided the best way to get me back was to convince everyone I'm insane. My aunt is elderly and frightened of him. She'll say whatever he tells her to say. Strong words. Can you back them up? I have written testimony, dates, times, specific incidents. I have Rhett Callahan as a witness to Marcus's behavior and my state of mind when he found me. And I have the fact that I'm sitting here, answering your questions coherently, showing no signs of the instability Marcus claims I have. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying her with those sharp eyes that seemed to see deeper than most. Tell me about the day you ran from your wedding. So she did. She told him everything. The building fear, Marcus's threat 3 days before, the moment of decision at the chapel window, the desperate flight through the storm. She told him about Rhett finding her, about the days at his cabin, about confronting Marcus yesterday. She didn't cry, didn't embellish, just laid out the facts as clearly as she could. When she finished, Dr. Morrison was nodding slowly. And during all this, did you experience any confusion about where you were or what was happening? Any hallucinations, delusions, loss of memory? No, sir. I was terrified, but I knew exactly what I was doing and why. Did you talk to yourself, as your former housekeeper claims? I may have muttered things while doing chores the way anyone might, but I wasn't having conversations with imaginary people, if that's what you mean. And the forgetfulness the merchants mentioned? Evelyn thought back. Marcus controlled all my money. He gave me a small allowance each week, barely enough to buy necessities. I often had to prioritize what I could afford, which meant leaving stores without items I'd initially asked about. Perhaps that looked like forgetfulness, but it was really just poverty. Dr. Morrison made a note in a small journal. Miss Marrow, I'm going to ask you some questions that might seem strange, but they're standard for assessing mental competency. What day is it today? Tuesday the 17th. Who is the current president? Grover Cleveland. Count backward from 100 by sevens. She did without hesitation. He asked her more questions, logic puzzles, memory tests, assessments of her judgment and reasoning. She answered them all clearly, feeling her confidence grow with each correct response. Finally, he closed his journal and looked at her directly. Miss Marrow, I've been practicing medicine for 40 years. I've examined hundreds of patients, including many suffering from genuine mental illness. You show none of the signs. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound. Your perceptions are reality-based. If anything, you demonstrate remarkable resilience given what you've been through. He paused. I'm going to certify that you are of sound mind and fully competent to manage your own affairs. I'm also going to note in my report that the claims made against you appear to be motivated by external factors rather than medical reality. Relief flooded through Evelyn so intensely she felt dizzy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me. I'm just reporting what I observe. But his expression was kind. However, I will say this. Marcus Thornhill is a dangerous man, not because he's violent, though he may be that too, but because he's calculating. He almost succeeded in building a case that would have trapped you in a system designed to control hysterical women. If you hadn't run when you did, if you hadn't found someone willing to help you. He shook his head. Be careful, Miss Marrow. Winning one battle doesn't mean the war is over. He packed up his instruments, wrote something on an official-looking form, and handed it to her. Give this to Mr. Garrett. It's my certification. It should help your case considerably. After Dr. Morrison left, Garrett and Rhett returned. Evelyn handed Garrett the certification and watched his face break into a satisfied smile as he read it. This is excellent. This changes everything. With this, Thornhill's guardianship petition is dead in the water. So we won? Evelyn hardly dared to hope. We won this round, but there will be others. Garrett was already moving, gathering papers, preparing documents. Thornhill won't give up just because his first strategy failed. He'll come at you another way. Lawsuits over the land, claims of breach of contract, defamation. Men with money and wounded pride can be relentless. Let him come. Evelyn surprised herself with the steel in her own voice. I'm not hiding anymore. Rhett, who'd been silent this whole time, finally spoke. We need to get you somewhere safe. If Thornhill finds out you're in town. As if summoned by his words, the sound of raised voices filtered in from the street outside. Rhett moved to the window, looked out, and his expression darkened. Speak of the devil, Thornhill just rode up with half a dozen men. They're heading this way. Garrett cursed quietly. How did he know? Doesn't matter, he's here. Rhett turned to Evelyn, his hand on his gun. Back room, now. Lock the door and don't come out unless I tell you to. I won't hide from him. But even as she said it, Evelyn felt the old fear creeping back. 6 men, Marcus and 5 others. The odds were impossible. This isn't about hiding. It's about not getting caught before we can file these documents. Garrett was already shoving papers into his satchel. Rhett's right. Back room. We'll handle this. The sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk outside. Angry voices. Evelyn recognized Marcus's tone even through the walls. She looked at Rhett, saw the determination in his face, and made a decision. She moved toward the back room, but left the door cracked so she could see and hear. The office door slammed open. Marcus stood in the doorway, Briggs and 4 other men behind him, all armed. His face was flushed with rage, his carefully maintained composure completely gone. Where is she? He demanded. I know she's here. I have witnesses who saw Callahan riding into town with a woman this morning. Mr. Thornhill. Garrett's voice was calm, professional. You're welcome to look around, but I assure you, my client's whereabouts are confidential. And might I add, barging into a lawyer's office with armed men is both illegal and unwise. Your client. Marcus's laugh was bitter. So she did hire you. With what money? She has nothing. She has her rights, which is more valuable than any currency. Garrett moved behind his desk, putting it between himself and the armed men. Now, I suggest you leave before I file harassment charges in addition to the other complaints Miss Marrow has already lodged. Marcus's eyes found Rhett, who stood perfectly still near the window, one hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. Callahan, always the hero, aren't you? Playing protector to a woman who doesn't have the sense to know what's good for her. What's good for her is about 1,000 miles between her and you. Rhett's voice was flat, dangerous. But since that's not practical, I'll settle for making sure you don't get within arm's reach. She's mine. Marcus took a step forward, and immediately Briggs and the other men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. I invested time, money, my reputation in that woman. I'm not going to let some cowboy and a 2-bit lawyer steal what belongs to me. A woman doesn't belong to anyone, Garrett said sharply. The law may not be perfect, Mr. Thornhill, but it's evolved past the point of treating women as property. Miss Marrow has the right to refuse your suit, to file complaints against you, and to defend her own interests. Complaints? Marcus's face darkened further. What complaints? Assault, coercion, attempted theft of property through fraudulent guardianship claims. Should I go on? Garrett pulled documents from his satchel. I have testimony, medical certification, and witness statements. I'm filing formal charges this afternoon. The silence that followed was absolute and deadly. Evelyn, watching from the cracked door, saw something shift in Marcus's expression, a calculation, a recognition that this had gone further than he'd expected. He'd thought he could control the narrative, use his money and influence to quietly take what he wanted. But Evelyn had lawyers now, doctors, evidence. She had a voice. This is a mistake, Marcus said finally, his voice low and controlled again. All of you are making a terrible mistake. Evelyn is confused, traumatized. She's been poisoned against me by outside influences. He looked directly at Rhett. By men with their own agendas. My only agenda is seeing justice done. Rhett's hand hadn't moved from his gun. And making sure that woman stays safe from men who hurt her. I never hurt her, but Marcus's protestation sounded hollow even to his own ears. Everything I did was for her benefit, to protect her, to provide for her. By hitting her? Rhett's voice went cold. By threatening her? By trying to steal her land? That's an interesting definition of protection. Marcus's control snapped. He lunged toward Rhett, and instantly the room erupted into chaos. Briggs and the other men moved forward, hands reaching for weapons. Rhett's revolver cleared its holster in a blur of motion, leveled at Marcus's chest. Garrett shouted something, but it was lost in the sound of hammers clicking back on multiple guns. Evelyn saw it all unfold in slow motion, saw the violence about to explode, and something inside her broke free. She threw open the door and stepped into the main office, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Every gun stayed drawn, every man poised for violence, but they all turned to look at her. She walked forward, past Garrett's desk, until she stood between Rhett and Marcus. It was possibly the most dangerous position in the room, but she was done cowering. "This ends now," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "Marcus, I am not yours. I was never yours. You didn't want me. You wanted my land, my signature on contracts, my compliance. You wanted someone you could control and use. Well, I'm done being controlled." Marcus stared at her, and for a moment she saw genuine confusion in his eyes, as if he truly couldn't understand why she wasn't grateful for his attention. "Evelyn, I was going to give you everything, a home, security, a position in society. All you had to do was be reasonable." Reasonable. The word came out as a laugh. "You hit me. You isolated me. You tried to have me declared insane so you could steal what my father left me. And you call that reasonable?" "I did what was necessary." His voice rose. "You were being stubborn, difficult. You needed guidance, discipline. I needed to be treated like a human being." Evelyn's anger finally boiled over. "I needed someone who saw me as more than a means to an end. I needed respect, kindness, basic decency. And you gave me none of those things." She took a breath, steadied herself. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm filing charges against you. I'm defending my land rights in court. And if you come near me again, if you threaten me or anyone helping me, I will make sure every person in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are." "You think they'll believe you?" Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "A nobody, a woman with no connections, no money, no—" "They'll believe Dr. Morrison's medical certification that I'm perfectly sane," she interrupted. "They'll believe Mr. Garrett's documentation of your premature mineral claim. They'll believe Rhett Callahan's testimony of your behavior. And they'll believe me, because I'm not the first woman you've tried to control, am I?" She saw it hit home, a flash of something in his eyes, fear maybe, or recognition that she'd somehow learned more than he thought. Garrett spoke up, his voice measured. "I've been asking around, Mr. Thornhill. Seems you had a similar arrangement with a woman in Denver before you came here. Courtship, promises, sudden cooling of affection when she wouldn't sign over property. She's willing to testify to a pattern of behavior." Marcus's face went ashen. The men behind him shifted uneasily, beginning to see their employer in a different light. Briggs still looked ready for violence, but the others seemed less certain now. "You can't prove any of that," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Maybe not in criminal court," Garrett acknowledged, "but in the court of public opinion? In civil proceedings? I think we can make a very compelling case." He stepped forward. "Here's my advice, Mr. Thornhill. Drop your guardianship petition. Withdraw your mineral claim on Miss Merrow's land. Leave Silver Creek and don't come back. Do that, and Miss Merrow might be persuaded not to press charges. Refuse, and we'll take this fight as far as it needs to go." The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to taste. Evelyn held her breath, aware that they were balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus could decide to fight, could let his pride and rage push this into violence, or he could cut his losses and retreat. Finally, Marcus straightened, smoothed his coat with shaking hands. When he looked at Evelyn again, his eyes held nothing but cold hatred. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure of it." "Is that a threat?" Rhett's gun was still trained on Marcus's chest. "It's a promise." Marcus turned, gestured to his men. We're leaving, but this isn't over. As they filed out, Briggs lingered in the doorway, his eyes on Rhett. We'll meet again, Callahan. Looking forward to it. Rhett's voice was mild, but the threat underneath was clear. Then they were gone, the sound of their horses fading down the street. The silence they left behind felt fragile, as if the slightest sound might shatter it and bring them all back. Evelyn's legs suddenly gave out. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, her whole body shaking with reaction. She'd faced down Marcus. She'd stood between armed men and refused to back down, and she was still alive. Rhett holstered his gun, moved to her side. You all right? I don't know. She looked up at him, saw concern in his gray eyes. I think so. That was terrifying. That was also incredibly brave. Garrett was already gathering papers again, moving with renewed purpose. And it might have just won you the case. Thornhill showed his hand, his temper, his violence, his true character. If I can get witness statements from the men who were with him, who saw his behavior. Will he really leave? Evelyn asked. Both men exchanged glances. Eventually, Rhett said, after he's exhausted every other option. Men like Thornhill don't give up easy. But you heard him today. His pride, his reputation, his plans. That counts for something. Evelyn nodded slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she'd been terrified to even enter Silver Creek. Now she'd confronted Marcus directly, had lawyers and doctors on her side, had evidence and allies. She was still frightened, still uncertain of what came next. But she was also still standing, still fighting, still free. And for now, that was enough. The legal proceedings moved faster than Evelyn had expected, though each day felt like it stretched into eternity. Garrett filed the formal response to Marcus's guardianship petition that same afternoon, along with Dr. Morrison's certification and the criminal complaints. By the following morning, the territorial judge had scheduled an emergency hearing for Thursday, just 2 days away. It was, Garrett explained, highly unusual for things to move so quickly, but the judge had read the initial filings and seemed disturbed enough by the allegations to expedite matters. Those 2 days were some of the longest of Evelyn's life. She stayed at a boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson, a stern widow who asked no questions and accepted Rhett's money without comment. Rhett himself took a room at the saloon across the street, positioning himself where he could watch anyone coming or going from Evelyn's location. He'd made it clear that Marcus's threats weren't idle, and until the hearing was over, Evelyn needed protection. She spent the time preparing with Garrett, going over every detail of her testimony, anticipating the questions Marcus's lawyer would ask, steeling herself for the public scrutiny that was coming. Garrett warned her repeatedly that the hearing would be brutal. Marcus would attack her character, her credibility, her very sanity in front of a courtroom full of people. She would have to sit there and endure it with composure, responding to accusations with dignity and truth. Wednesday evening, the night before the hearing, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat in her small room at the boarding house, watching shadows move across the ceiling, her mind turning over everything that had happened in the weeks since she'd fled that chapel. It felt like a lifetime ago. She felt like a different person than the frightened woman who'd run through the rain in a torn wedding dress. A soft knock on her door made her tense. "It's me," came Rhett's voice, quiet and steady. She opened the door to find him standing in the dim hallway, his hat in his hands. "You all right?" he asked. "Saw your light still on. Couldn't sleep. Too much thinking." She stepped back to let him in, suddenly grateful not to be alone with her thoughts. He entered but left the door open a few inches, proper, even in these improper circumstances. He settled into the chair by the window while she sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment they just existed in comfortable silence. "You nervous about tomorrow?" he asked finally. Terrified. She twisted her hands in her lap. "What if I freeze up? What if I can't find the words? What if the judge doesn't believe me?" "Then you'll deal with it, same way you've dealt with everything else." Rhett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Evelyn, I've seen a lot of people face hard things in my life. Most of them break or run. But you? You keep standing back up. You ran from that wedding, but you didn't keep running. You stopped, you fought back, you found your voice. That takes courage most people never find." "I don't feel courageous. I feel scared." Being scared and doing it anyway, that's what courage is. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think tomorrow you're going to walk into that courtroom and you're going to tell your truth. And maybe the judge believes you. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. But either way, you'll know you didn't let fear make your decisions anymore. You'll know you stood up for yourself when it mattered most. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Why do you have so much faith in me? You barely know me. I know enough. Rhett's voice was soft. I know you're stronger than you think. I know you deserve better than what Thornhill tried to give you. And I know that whatever happens tomorrow, you're not alone in that courtroom. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and comforting. She wasn't alone. That simple fact changed everything. For so long, Marcus had isolated her, made her feel like she had no one, that resistance was futile. But Rhett had shown her something different, that sometimes when you're brave enough to ask for help, people surprise you. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for stopping in the rain that night, for giving me shelter, for standing with me through all of this. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't need repayment, just... He hesitated, searching for words. Just keep being the person you're becoming, the person who doesn't let anyone tell her she's not worth fighting for. That's payment enough. He stood then, settling his hat back on his head. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard, but you're ready for it. I promise you that. As after he left, Evelyn did finally sleep. And when she woke Thursday morning, she felt something she hadn't expected. Calm. The fear was still there, humming beneath her skin, but it no longer controlled her. She dressed carefully in the one decent dress Mrs. Henderson had lent her, plain but respectable, nothing that would draw undue attention. She pinned her hair up neatly, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw not a victim but a woman preparing to fight for her freedom. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. The runaway bride, the guardianship dispute, the allegations of abuse and fraud. It was the most dramatic thing to happen in town in years, and everyone wanted to witness it. Evelyn felt their eyes on her as she walked down the aisle to the front of the courtroom, heard the whispers that followed her like ghosts. She kept her head high, her eyes forward, Rhett's solid presence at her shoulder reminding her she wasn't alone. Marcus was already seated at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Helena named Wardell. Marcus looked every inch the respectable businessman. Expensive suit, clean-shaven, his expression carefully composed into one of concerned sadness. When his eyes met Evelyn's, she saw the hatred beneath the mask, but also something else. Uncertainty. He wasn't as confident as he wanted everyone to believe. Judge Harlan Whitmore entered, and everyone rose. He was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Garrett had warned her that Whitmore was fair but traditional, that he'd need compelling evidence to rule against a man of Marcus's standing. But he'd also said Whitmore hated liars, and if they could prove Marcus had been deceptive, the judge would come down hard. The proceedings began with opening statements. Wardell painted Marcus as a devoted fiancé worried about his beloved's mental health, a man who'd only sought guardianship out of deep concern and care. He spoke of Evelyn's erratic behavior, the statements from witnesses claiming she'd been confused and unstable, the way she'd fled her own wedding in a state of clear psychological distress. Then Garrett stood. His opening was quieter but more powerful. He spoke of a young woman trapped in an abusive relationship, a man who'd systematically worked to isolate and control her, who'd attempted to use the legal system to complete that control when she finally found the courage to escape. He spoke of evidence, of Dr. Morrison's certification, of Marcus's premature mineral claim that revealed his true motives. By the time he finished, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. People were listening, really listening. The testimony began. Wardell called witness after witness. Shopkeepers who claimed Evelyn had seemed forgetful. Her Aunt Martha, who tearfully insisted Evelyn had been acting strangely. Even the former housekeeper who swore she'd heard Evelyn talking to herself. Each one chipped away at her credibility, painting a picture of a woman losing her grip on reality. Garrett cross-examined each witness carefully, and gradually cracks appeared in their stories. The shopkeeper admitted Marcus had specifically asked him about Evelyn's behavior, had perhaps suggested the interpretation. Aunt Martha, under questioning, revealed she was financially dependent on Marcus and terrified of losing his support. The housekeeper couldn't provide specific dates or details, just vague impressions that sounded more like gossip than observation. Then it was Evelyn's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand on legs that threatened to give out, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As she settled into the chair, she looked out at the packed courtroom and felt the weight of all those eyes, all that judgment. But then she found Rhett in the crowd, saw him give her the slightest nod, and remembered what he'd said. Tell your truth. Garrett led her through her testimony gently, establishing the timeline of her relationship with Marcus, the gradual escalation of control, the isolation from friends and family. She spoke clearly about the first time he'd hit her, the shock of it, the apology that followed, the promise it would never happen again. She described the pattern that developed, the way he'd use affection and violence in equal measure to keep her off balance, always questioning herself, always believing she was the problem. And 3 days before your wedding, Garrett prompted. What happened then? Evelyn took a breath. I questioned some legal documents he wanted me to sign, documents that would transfer my father's land to him after we married. He became enraged. He struck me across the face, split my lip. He told me, her voice wavered, but she pushed on. He told me that after we married, I would learn what happens to wives who don't obey. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the whispers had stopped. Evelyn continued, describing the wedding day, her decision to run, Rhett finding her in the rain. She spoke about Marcus coming to Rhett's cabin with the marshal, about confronting him in Garrett's office. She laid it all out, every painful detail, her voice growing stronger with each word. Then Wardell stood for cross-examination, and the real attack began. He questioned her interpretation of events. Couldn't that split lip have been from a fall? Couldn't Marcus's concerns about her mental state have been genuine? Wasn't it possible that her fear and confusion were symptoms of the very instability Marcus had been trying to address? Miss Marrow, Wardell said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, isn't it true that you have no family support, no financial resources, and were facing the prospect of losing your late father's property to debt? Isn't it possible that Mr. Thornhill's marriage proposal seemed like the only solution, and when the reality of that commitment became clear, you panicked? No, Evelyn said firmly. I fled because I feared for my safety. Because Marcus Thornhill is a violent, controlling man who wanted my land, not me. Everything else is lies he's constructed to justify his behavior. Lies. Wardell smiled, not kindly. Strong word. Can you prove these allegations? Can you provide any evidence beyond your own claims? I have Dr. Morrison's certification of my mental competency, which contradicts every claim Marcus has made. I have witness testimony from Rhett Callahan. I have the documented fact that Marcus filed a mineral claim on my property before we were even married, proving his interest was always financial, not romantic. A man planning for his future wife's security, a man stealing property that wasn't his. Evelyn's anger was rising now, burning away the fear. You can dress it up however you want, Mr. Wardell, but the truth is simple. Marcus Thornhill tried to use marriage as a weapon to take what didn't belong to him. When I refused to be victimized, he tried to use the law instead, and I'm here today to make sure he doesn't succeed. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel for order. Wardell tried a few more questions, but Evelyn didn't waver. She'd found her voice, and she wasn't letting it be silenced. After her testimony, Garrett called Dr. Morrison, who spoke authoritatively about Evelyn's mental competence and his concerns about the medical statements Marcus had obtained. Then Rhett took the stand, and his testimony was devastating in its simplicity. He described finding Evelyn in the rain, injured and terrified. He described Marcus's behavior at his cabin and later at Garrett's office, the threats, the proprietary attitude, the barely controlled violence. He spoke with the plain honesty of someone who had no agenda except truth, and it carried weight. Finally, Garrett dropped his bombshell. He called a witness no one had expected, a woman named Catherine Mills from Denver. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, and when she took the stand, her resemblance to Evelyn was striking. Same auburn hair, same delicate features, same quiet strength in her bearing. Miss Mills, Garrett began, do you know the defendant, Marcus Thornhill? I do. He courted me in Denver 2 years ago. The courtroom exploded into noise. Whitmore gavelled for order again, his expression sharp with interest. Garrett continued, "Can you describe the nature of that courtship?" Catherine Mill's testimony was eerily similar to Evelyn's story. A whirlwind romance, increasing control, pressure to sign over property rights, escalating violence when she questioned him. She'd finally ended the relationship, but not before Marcus had attempted to have her declared mentally unfit, the exact same strategy he'd tried with Evelyn. She'd fought him off with her own lawyer, and he'd eventually left Denver, moving on to find another target. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Garrett asked. "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought no one would believe me. Because men like Marcus Thornhill are very good at making you think you're the problem." She looked directly at Marcus, who'd gone pale. "But when I heard about Miss Merrow's situation, I realized my silence was allowing him to hurt another woman. I couldn't let that stand." Wardell tried to discredit her testimony, but the damage was done. The pattern was established. Marcus Thornhill targeted women with property, used romance and violence to control them, and attempted to use guardianship laws to complete his theft when they resisted. It wasn't one woman's word against a man's anymore. It was two women, plus medical evidence, plus documentation, plus the testimony of an unimpeachable witness like Rhett Callahan. When testimony concluded, Judge Whitmore called for a brief recess before closing arguments. Evelyn sat with Garrett and Rhett in a side room, her hands shaking with reaction. She'd done it. She'd testified, stood up to cross-examination, told her truth in front of the entire town. Whatever happened next, she'd done everything she could. "You were magnificent," Garrett said, and he looked genuinely impressed. "Wardell tried everything and couldn't shake you. Combined with Catherine Mills's testimony and Dr. Morrison's certification, I think we have a strong case." "What happens if we lose?" Evelyn had to ask. "Then we appeal, and we keep fighting until we win or exhaust every legal option." Garrett's expression was determined, "But I don't think we're going to lose." The closing arguments were brief. Wardell tried to salvage Marcus's case, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. The evidence had turned against him, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Garrett's closing was powerful, speaking not just to Evelyn's case but to the broader issue of how the law treated women, how easily a woman's rights could be stripped away by a man's accusations, how critical it was that the court see through Marcus's manipulation to the truth beneath. Then Judge Whitmore spoke. "I've heard enough. This is one of the more disturbing cases I've encountered in my tenure. What we have here is a clear pattern of abuse, coercion, and attempted fraud, dressed up in legal language to make it seem respectable." He turned his gaze on Marcus, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. "Mr. Thornhill, your guardianship petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ruling that your mineral claim on Miss Merrow's property was filed fraudulently and is hereby voided. The property remains solely in Miss Merrow's name, and I'm issuing a restraining order preventing you from approaching her or her property." The courtroom erupted. Marcus stood, his face twisted with rage. "This is absurd. That land is not yours," Whitmore interrupted coldly. "And I warn you, Mr. Thornhill, that any further attempts to harass Miss Merrow or interfere with her property will result in criminal charges. I'm also referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor to investigate possible charges of assault and fraud." "You're dismissed, sir. I suggest you retain competent legal counsel." Evelyn felt like she couldn't breathe. She'd won. Against all odds, against a system designed to favor men like Marcus, she'd won. Garrett was shaking her hand, congratulating her, talking about next steps and paperwork, but his words washed over her in a blur. She looked across the courtroom and found Rhett, saw the pride and relief on his face, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that she couldn't contain. Rhett was there in an instant, not caring about propriety or what anyone thought, pulling her into an embrace while she wept against his chest. "You did it," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Evelyn, you did it." She had. She really had. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and town gossip. Marcus left Silver Creek within 48 hours of the ruling, slinking away in the night like the coward he was. Word spread quickly about the hearing, about Catherine Mills's testimony, about the judge's scathing ruling, Public opinion turned sharply against Marcus, and those who'd supported him quietly distanced themselves. Evelyn's Aunt Martha came to visit, tearful and apologetic, explaining how Marcus had threatened to cut off her support if she didn't cooperate. Evelyn forgave her. She understood better than anyone how Marcus operated. The territorial prosecutor decided to pursue criminal charges, but Marcus had fled to San Francisco and showed no signs of returning. Evelyn was content to let him go. She had her land, her freedom, and her future back. That was enough. 2 weeks after the hearing, she and Rhett rode out to her father's property together. She hadn't seen it in months. Marcus had forbidden her from visiting, claiming it was too dangerous for a woman alone. Now, as they crested the ridge and looked down at the 160 acres of rocky Montana wilderness, Evelyn felt her heart swell with emotion. It wasn't much to look at. Her father's old cabin was falling apart, the barn roof had caved in, and the land was as unforgiving as everyone said. But it was hers. Her father had broken his back working this soil, and now she understood why. It wasn't about the silver that might or might not be buried in those hills. It was about having something that belonged to you, something no one could take away without a fight. "What are you going to do with it?" Rhett asked as they sat their horses side by side. "I'm not sure yet." Evelyn looked out at the property, seeing not what it was but what it could be. "Maybe rebuild the cabin, fix up the barn, try to make it work the way my father wanted. Or maybe I'll sell it, use the money to start over somewhere else. I have options now. That's the important thing." "You do." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "You know, if you decide to stay in Silver Creek, rebuild this place, you're going to need help. It's a lot of work for one person." Evelyn looked at him, at the careful neutrality of his expression that didn't quite hide the hope beneath. "Are you offering?" "Might be." He shifted in his saddle. "My place is small, manageable. I could spare some time to help a neighbor. If that neighbor wanted help, that is. And if that neighbor wanted more than just help." The words were out before Evelyn could stop them, bold and terrifying and true. If she wanted someone to build something with, not just a ranch, but a life? Rhett turned to face her fully, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Then I'd say that neighbor should know something first. I'm not a rich man, Evelyn. I can't offer you fancy houses or trips to Denver or any of the things Marcus Thornhill promised. I'm just a cowboy with a small ranch and a lot of hard work ahead of me." "I don't want fancy houses." Evelyn's voice was steady, certain. "I want honesty. I want respect. I want someone who sees me as a partner, not property. Someone who'll stand beside me, not over me. Can you offer me that?" "Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." His voice was rough with emotion. "I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long. But from the moment I found you in that rain, soaked and terrified and still fighting, I knew you were someone special, someone worth standing with." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. Happy tears. "You offered me your name once. That first night in your cabin, you said I could have it if I ever wanted it. Did you mean that?" "I meant it." Rhett reached across the space between their horses, took her hand in his. "But I need you to understand, I'm not offering you rescue. I'm not trying to save you or take care of you like you're something fragile that needs protecting. You're strong enough to stand on your own. I've seen it." "Then what are you offering?" "Partnership, companionship, someone to share the load when it gets heavy, someone to celebrate with when things go right. A life built together, not one person controlling the other." He squeezed her hand gently, "But only if that's what you want. You just got your freedom back. I won't be another cage, even a comfortable one." Evelyn looked at him, this man who'd stopped in the rain for a stranger, who'd fought for her without expecting anything in return, who'd shown her what kindness looked like when it wasn't hiding cruelty underneath. She thought about the future stretching ahead of her, full of possibilities she'd never dared imagine. She could face it alone, prove to herself and everyone else that she didn't need anyone. Or she could choose to face it with someone who'd already proven he saw her as an equal. "I want to do this right," she said slowly. "I want time to heal, to figure out who I am without fear dictating my choices. I want to rebuild my father's ranch, make it into something sustainable. I want to stand on my own 2 feet first." She saw the flicker of disappointment cross Rhett's face before he nodded. "I understand." But, she continued, tightening her grip on his hand, I also want you there while I do it, not as my rescuer or my keeper, but as my friend, my partner. And when I'm ready, when I've proven to myself that I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I need to, then yes, I'll take your name and give you mine, and we'll build something together. The smile that broke across Rhett's face was like sunrise, warming everything it touched. How long do you think you'll need? I don't know, a few months, a year, however long it takes. She smiled back at him. Think you can wait that long? Evelyn, I'd wait a lifetime if that's what you needed. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. But I'm hoping it won't take quite that long. They sat there on the ridge, hands clasped between their horses, looking out at the wild Montana landscape that would be their future. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Hope. The certainty that whatever came next, she was ready for it. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Evelyn Merrow married Rhett Callahan in a simple ceremony at the church in Silver Creek. She wore a dress she'd made herself, simple cotton instead of silk, and carried wildflowers instead of roses. Aunt Martha cried happy tears in the front row. Dr. Morrison gave her away. Edmund Garrett served as best man, still proud of the case that had changed territorial law regarding women's guardianship rights. And when Rhett took her hand and spoke his vows, promising to honor her, respect her, stand beside her through whatever came, Evelyn finally understood the difference between a promise made in love and one made in possession. This was what she'd been waiting for all along, not a man to save her, but a partner to walk with her. Not someone to give her his name as a brand of ownership, but someone to share his name as a symbol of equality. The ranch they built together wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Her father's land and Rhett's property combined to create something sustainable, profitable even, especially after the silver deposits proved real and they sold the mineral rights for enough money to invest in cattle and equipment. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building a life neither of them could have imagined that rainy night when a lone cowboy stopped for a woman in a torn wedding dress. Years later, when people asked Evelyn about that time in her life, about the trial and the escape and the man who'd tried to steal her future, she always said the same thing. Running from that chapel was the scariest thing she'd ever done. But it was also the moment her real life began, the moment she chose freedom over fear, dignity over desperation, and her own voice over someone else's control. And yes, she'd been saved that night in the rain. But not by Rhett Callahan, no matter what the romantic story suggested. She'd been saved by her own courage, her own refusal to accept a fate that would have destroyed her. Rhett had simply been there to witness it, to support it, and eventually to celebrate it beside her. That was the real story. That was the truth worth telling. The bride hadn't just fled her abusive fiancé, she'd fled toward herself, toward the person she'd always been meant to become. The lone cowboy who found her in the rain hadn't offered his name as salvation. He'd offered it as recognition, one free soul acknowledging another and asking if she'd like to walk the same path for a while. She'd said yes, and together they'd built something beautiful,